My brother didn't come to the hospital when our mother was dying. He came 2 hours after she passed, with a notary public and a document I had never seen before. I was still sitting in the chair beside her empty bed, holding a paper cup of cold coffee that a nurse had pressed into my hands somewhere between the last breath and the flatline. The room smelled like antiseptic and the faint trace of her lavender lotion. I hadn't moved. I couldn't move. And then the door swung open, and my brother walked in with a stranger in a gray suit, and the first words out of his mouth weren't about her at all. He told me the estate paperwork had to be filed within 48 hours. I looked at him. He wasn't red-eyed. He wasn't pale. He looked like a man who had just closed a deal and was already thinking about dinner, and in that moment, something cold and clear settled into the center of my chest. Not grief. Not shock. Something older and quieter than both of those things. Recognition. I am Claire. I'm 31 years old, and I spent the better part of a decade building a career as a real estate attorney. I understand contracts the way some people understand music instinctively, in my body, before my brain has finished reading the page. My mother knew this about me. She used to joke that I came out of the womb asking to see the fine print. What I also understand, because I lived it for 31 years, is my brother. He is 4 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, he has treated our family like a piggy bank with legs. When we were teenagers, he stole $60 from my mother's purse and told her I did it. She believed him. When I was in college, he convinced our father, before the dementia took him, to co-sign a business loan for a restaurant that never opened. The money vanished. My father never saw a dime of it returned. When our father died 6 years ago, my brother cried so loudly at the funeral that people kept coming over to comfort him while I sat in the front row and quietly handled every single arrangement by myself. He had a talent for performing grief while other people carried it, and now he was standing in my mother's hospital room with a notary public, telling me the estate paperwork had to be filed in 48 hours. I set down my cold coffee. I stood up. I looked at the document he held out to me. It was a will. My mother's name was at the top. Her signature was at the bottom. But I had helped my mother draft her actual will 14 months ago. I had sat at her kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, and we had gone through every asset, every account, every piece of jewelry she wanted to leave to specific people. I knew that document the way I knew my own handwriting, and the signature at the bottom of what my brother was holding did not match the signature I had watched my mother press carefully onto paper 14 months ago. I didn't say a word. I thanked the notary public for his time. I told my brother I was too exhausted to look at anything tonight, and that we would talk tomorrow. I hugged him, which I had not done in years, and I felt him relax against me with the particular looseness of someone who thinks they have already won. He had made the same mistake every person like him eventually makes. He assumed that because I had always been quiet, I had always been powerless. I drove home. I didn't cry. I sat at my own kitchen table with a glass of water and a yellow legal pad, and I started writing. The first thing I did was call Marcus. Marcus had been my mother's estate attorney for 11 years. He was 72 years old, semi-retired, and the kind of man who kept paper files on everything because he didn't entirely trust computers. When I told him what I had seen, there was a long silence on the phone. Then he said, very quietly, that my mother's actual will was locked in his filing cabinet, that she had never revoked it, that no amendment had ever been filed, and that the document my brother had presented to me was, in his professional opinion, fraudulent. I asked Marcus if he was willing to help me. He said he had known my mother for 11 years, and had watched her raise 2 children mostly alone after my father got sick. He said he would do whatever I needed. The second call I made was to a private investigator named Dana, who I had worked with twice before on property fraud cases. Dana was 44, former law enforcement, and had the kind of voice that made people think she was on their side even when she wasn't. I told her what I needed. She told me she would have answers by morning. I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen and thought about my mother. She had been a high school music teacher for 27 years. She drove a 2009 Honda Accord that she called Gerald. She made the same chicken soup every winter and always added too much dill and never admitted it. When I passed the bar exam, she drove 3 hours to take me to dinner at a restaurant she couldn't afford and insisted on paying. When my brother called her crying about his debts, she wired him money she also couldn't afford and told me not to mention it. She loved him with the blind persistence of someone who had decided, very early on, that she could love a person into becoming better. She never could, but she never stopped trying. The house, the savings account, the small investment portfolio she had built carefully over 30 years, she had wanted it split evenly between us. Half for me, half for him, with a provision that his portion be held in a managed trust so he couldn't spend it in 6 months on whatever disaster had replaced the last disaster. That was the will I had helped her write. What my brother had presented was a single-page document leaving everything, the house, the accounts, every cent entirely to him. By 8 in the morning, Dana had sent me 3 files. The first was a financial summary. My brother owed $210,000. Not to a bank. To a private lender who operated at the edge of what was technically legal and well beyond what was ethically acceptable. The deadline for repayment was 9 days away. The second file was a surveillance photo from 3 weeks ago, taken outside a document preparation service 40 minutes from our mother's house. My brother was in the photo. So was a man Dana had identified as a notary who had had his license suspended in another state 2 years prior for document fraud. The third file was a printout of my brother's browsing history from a shared family laptop he had borrowed from my mother 6 weeks ago and never returned. He had searched, in order: how long does probate take? How to contest a will as executor? What happens if a will is challenged after assets are distributed? And, most helpfully, how long before forged signature is detected on legal document? I sat back in my chair. He hadn't just stolen from our mother. He had planned this while she was still alive. He had sat in her house, borrowed her laptop, and researched how to take everything she had worked for, while she was still breathing the same air. I thought about the last time I had visited her, about 6 weeks before she got sick. She had seemed distracted. She had made tea, and then forgotten about it, and made it again. At the time, I thought she was tired. Now I wondered if something had already shifted in her house. If some conversation had happened that she hadn't told me about. If my brother had already begun laying the groundwork while she was still healthy enough to be manipulated. I closed my laptop. I picked up my phone, and I called my brother. I told him I had looked at the paperwork. I told him it all seemed straightforward, and that I thought we should meet at Marcus's office to move things forward. I used the word straightforward twice, casually, like someone who hadn't slept all night building a case. I heard the satisfaction in his voice when he agreed. The looseness again. The ease of a man who believed the hard part was already over. Marcus had a conference room on the second floor of his office building with floor-to-ceiling windows and a long mahogany table and, as of 9 o'clock that morning, a small camera installed in the bookcase behind the chair where my brother would be sitting. Dana had also positioned herself in the parking structure across the street with a clear sightline to the building entrance and a contact at the county sheriff's office who owed her a favor. The trap had one moving part. Marcus was going to present my brother with 2 options. Option 1. The existing will, which Marcus would explain had been flagged by the probate court for an irregularity in the notarization, a real procedural vulnerability Dana had identified in the fraudulent document. Under Option 1, the estate would be frozen for a minimum of 6 months while the court conducted a review. My brother did not have 6 months. He barely had 9 days. Option 2. A deed of voluntary distribution. Marcus would explain that if both heirs signed a voluntary distribution agreement waiving the probate process, the assets could be transferred within 72 hours. The document Marcus would slide across the table under Option 2 was, on its face, a straightforward asset distribution agreement. It was also a sworn statement, embedded in the legal language on page 3, in which the signing party attested that they had no knowledge of any fraudulent alteration of the decedent's estate documents and were signing in good faith with full disclosure of all relevant facts. If my brother signed it, he was signing a perjury declaration. If my brother signed it after everything Dana had documented, he was handing us the confession. I waited in Marcus's private office with the door slightly open while my brother arrived. I heard him in the lobby, heard him making small talk with the receptionist, heard the particular warmth he turned on for strangers. He had always been charming to people who didn't know him. It was the people who did know him that he couldn't maintain the performance for. Marcus brought him to the conference room. I listened through the gap in the door. Marcus explained the probate complication in the measured, regretful tone of a man delivering difficult news. I heard my brother's energy change, the small shift in his breathing, the way his voice went tight and controlled when he asked how long 6 months could realistically become. Marcus said it could stretch to 14, 18 months, depending on how backed up the court was. Then Marcus introduced Option 2. I heard the pause. My brother asked what page to sign. He didn't ask what he was signing. He didn't ask Marcus to walk him through the language. He asked what page and where to put his name. Marcus told him page 3, and indicated the signature line. I heard the scratch of a pen. He didn't hesitate, not for a single second. That was the thing about people like my brother. They were so certain they were the smartest person in the room that they never actually read the room. The door to the private office opened. Marcus gave me a small nod. I walked into the conference room. My brother looked up from the table. He saw me, and for about 3 seconds, his face did absolutely nothing, which was somehow the most telling reaction he could have had. A person with a clear conscience would have been surprised to see me. A person with something to hide goes blank while their brain runs the calculations. Then he smiled. He said it was good I was there, that it would make the process easier if we were both present. I sat down across from him. I set my phone on the table, screen down. I told him I had a question about the will he had shown me at the hospital. He said of course, whatever I needed. I asked him when our mother had revised her estate documents, because I had helped her draft them 14 months ago and hadn't been informed of any changes. He said she had updated them quietly, that she hadn't wanted to create drama, that she had confided in him that she felt I was too focused on my career to want to be burdened with the responsibilities of the estate. He said this with complete calm. He looked me in the eyes and constructed a version of our mother that had never existed, a version who had chosen him, privately, after a lifetime of watching him take from her. He said it like it was sad but true, like he was sparing me something by telling me I had spent my whole life watching him do this. invent a reality that benefited him, and then present it with such conviction that the people around him started to wonder if they had misremembered their own experiences. I said, "I see." I turned my phone over and pressed play. It was a voicemail. Our mother had left it for me 8 weeks ago. Her voice was clear and strong, the way it got when she was being deliberately precise about something. She said she wanted me to know she had not changed her will, and had no intention of changing it. She said my brother had asked her to, twice, and she had told him no both times. She said she was telling me because she wanted there to be a record, in her own words, that her wishes were what she had documented with Marcus and nothing else. She said she loved me. She said she was making chicken soup and adding too much dill again. Don't tell her. The room was very quiet. My brother's expression had stopped being anything recognizable. It had gone to some neutral, waiting place, while he figured out which version of himself to become next. He became angry. He leaned forward and told me this was a betrayal. He said our mother had been confused in her final months, that the voicemail didn't mean anything, that I was twisting a sick woman's words to take what wasn't mine. His voice rose. He said I had always been jealous of his relationship with her. He said I had always resented that she trusted him more. He said I was going to destroy the family over money, and he said it with the absolute, ringing conviction of someone who had been saying versions of this sentence his entire life, and had never once been contradicted. I let him finish. I told him that the document he had signed on page 3 was a sworn declaration that he had no knowledge of any fraudulent alteration of the estate documents. I told him that Dana had photographs of him entering a document preparation service with a suspended notary 3 weeks before our mother died. I told him that his search history from our mother's borrowed laptop had been preserved and documented. I told him that the camera in the bookcase had recorded him signing the declaration without reading it, which would be very helpful when the fraud examiner testified about the signature on the forged will, not matching our mother's verified signature on file, with Marcus's office. I told him the sheriff's office was waiting in the parking structure. My brother stood up so fast his chair hit the wall behind him. He wasn't performing anymore. The charm, the warmth, the practiced sadness, all of it was gone. And what was underneath was something I had only glimpsed a few times growing up, in moments when he thought no one was watching. A cold and furious thing that had never understood why the world didn't simply give him what he wanted. He told me I was going to regret this. He told me he was family, and that I was throwing family away over a piece of paper. He told me our mother would be ashamed of me. I thought about her voice on that voicemail, clear and deliberate, making sure there was a record. I thought about the chicken soup with too much dill. I thought about the restaurant she drove 3 hours to take me to, the one she couldn't afford, the check she wouldn't let me touch. I said nothing. 2 sheriff's deputies came through the conference room door. My brother spun around. The mask came back. Briefly, he straightened. He tried the charm. He started to explain that there had been a misunderstanding. One of the deputies asked him to put his hands behind his back. He kept talking. The deputy asked again. The handcuffs made a sound like a period, at the end of a very long sentence. My brother was charged with estate fraud, forgery of a legal document, perjury, and filing a false instrument. The DA's office added a charge related to the suspended notary, who, when presented with the evidence, cooperated fully, and gave a statement within 48 hours. Bail was set at $90,000. My brother didn't have it. He had never had it. Every cent he had ever touched had slipped through his hands or been owed to someone else before he even received it. He spent 11 days in county lockup before a bail bondsman agreed to take his car and the watch our father had left him as collateral. He walked out with an ankle monitor and a court date and immediately violated the terms of his pretrial release by contacting me directly. The text said only, "You should be careful." I forwarded it to the DA's office and to Dana, and I changed my locks that afternoon and installed a security camera above my front door. Dana had a contact at the monitoring center for the ankle bracelet program. She would know if he came within 2 blocks of my building. He came within 2 blocks of my building 11 days later, at 2 in the morning. I was not home. I had been staying at a friend's apartment since the text message, not out of fear, exactly, but out of the same practical caution that had led me to install the camera. I watched on my phone as my brother tried my front door, then the window beside it, then stood on my front step for 4 minutes doing nothing at all, which somehow felt more threatening than anything else. The monitoring center flagged the violation simultaneously. 2 patrol officers arrived within 7 minutes. He was taken back into custody. The judge at his bond revocation hearing was a woman who had been on the bench for 19 years and had, according to Marcus, very little patience for people who treated court orders as suggestions. She revoked his bond, added the violation to the pending charges, and set a new pretrial date. My brother sat in county jail for the 4 months between his arrest and his sentencing. I spent those 4 months handling my mother's actual estate, the house sold to a retired teacher and her husband who had been looking for 18 months. The woman cried a little when I handed her the keys, and I thought my mother would have liked that, someone loving the house the same way she had, not for what it was worth but for what it could hold. The sentencing hearing was on a Tuesday in November. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and fluorescent lit and somehow very ordinary for the weight of what happened inside it. My brother stood at the defense table in a suit that didn't fit him quite right. a little too big in the shoulders, borrowed from someone or bought in a hurry. He had lost weight in county. The performance was still there, the slight bow of his head, the expression of careful sorrow, but it had nowhere to land. There was no audience for it anymore. The judge read through the charges with the flat efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times, and still took each one seriously. Forgery, fraud, perjury, violation of pretrial conditions. The prosecutor laid out the evidence in order. The photographs, the search history, the voicemail, the signed declaration, the notary's cooperation agreement. My brother's attorney argued mitigating circumstances, grief, financial desperation, the particular pressure of watching a parent decline. The judge listened. She did not look sympathetic. She sentenced him to 9 years. He would be eligible for parole consideration after 6. The court also ordered restitution of the legal fees, the estate costs, and the documented financial harm, a number that, given his existing debts, he would be paying off for the rest of his working life. The private lender he had been trying to satisfy by stealing from our mother would have to get in line behind the court order. Dana had quietly ensured that the lender was also facing a regulatory inquiry, which meant they had other problems to worry about for the foreseeable future. When the gavel came down, my brother turned and looked at me across the courtroom. I don't know what he expected to see. Maybe tears, maybe guilt, maybe some echo of the little girl who used to cover for him, absorb for him, explain him to people who had already seen clearly who he was. I looked back at him the way you look at a problem that has been correctly resolved. The bailiff touched his arm. He turned away. I drove home alone, stopped at the grocery store, made dinner. I ate at my kitchen table with the news on low and a glass of wine and the very specific silence of a house that belongs only to you. 3 weeks after the sentencing, a letter arrived. My brother's handwriting on the envelope, the county jail return address in the corner. I stood in my kitchen holding it the way I had once held every document he had ever asked me to look at, with the automatic attentiveness of someone trained since childhood to manage his fallout. I thought about what was inside. An appeal to guilt, almost certainly. A reframing of events in which he was the real victim. Some version of the argument that I had weaponized the legal system against my own family. That our mother would be devastated. That I had chosen a career over blood. I have a small paper shredder on my desk. It takes about 4 seconds per page. I didn't feel anything dramatic when I fed the envelope into it. I didn't feel triumph or grief or the particular bittersweet ache that movies suggest you're supposed to feel when something long and painful finally ends. I felt the way you feel when you finish a very hard project that took longer than it should have. Tired, and then relieved, and then hungry for something completely unrelated. I got up and made toast. People have asked me, since then, whether I feel guilty. They ask it carefully, in the tone people use when they already suspect your answer might disturb them. Whether I feel guilty that my brother is in a cell because of information I gathered, a trap I built, a case I helped construct. Whether I feel like I should have tried harder to reach him, talk to him, give him a way out that didn't end in prison. I tell them the truth. I feel nothing about it that resembles guilt. What I feel is the clean, clarifying peace of a person who finally stopped trying to fix something that was never going to be fixed. My brother is not a person who made a bad decision under pressure. He is a person who, the moment our mother closed her eyes, drove to a document preparation service and hired a suspended notary to forge her signature while her body was still warm. That is not desperation. That is character. That is a lifetime of being allowed to take without consequence, finally arriving at its logical conclusion. I spent 31 years trying to be good enough to earn what he had stolen. Being more patient, more responsible, more forgiving, showing up to every family event, and smoothing over every disaster, and explaining him to people who were rightfully angry with him. I told myself it was loyalty. What it actually was training. I had been trained from childhood to manage the damage he caused. And I had been so thoroughly trained that I had confused the training with love. It took watching him try to steal our dead mother's estate to finally understand that you can love someone and still hold them accountable. That forgiveness is a private act that has nothing to do with consequences. That the court didn't sentence my brother on my behalf. It sentenced him on the behalf of a woman who spent her whole life working and saving and hoping that the son she loved would one day decide to be worthy of it. I couldn't give her that, but I could give her this. There are things I understand now that I wish someone had told me when I was 10 years old and taking the blame for a fire I didn't start. The first is that loyalty given without limit is not a virtue. It is a resource being extracted. When someone in your family consistently costs you more than they give your time, your reputation, your peace, your money, your sense of reality, they are not struggling and in need of patience. They are taking, deliberately, because you have taught them that you will keep giving. Love has to include the word, enough. I love you and I have done enough. I love you and this ends here. Without the word enough, love is not love. It is a blank check. The second is that silence is not the same as acceptance. For years I said nothing. Not because I had nothing to say, but because speaking had never changed anything and fighting had only given my brother more material to use against me. I thought my silence was defeat. It was actually patience. It was documentation. Every time I watched and said nothing, I was learning. Every time I absorbed instead of reacting, I was building something he couldn't see yet. Silence, chosen carefully, is not a surrender. It is a strategy. The third is the hardest one, and it is this. You cannot save people who are committed to burning things down. Not with more love, not with more patience, not with more resources poured into the space where accountability should be. My mother tried for 55 years to save my brother by believing in the version of him she wished existed. She believed it so hard that she made herself vulnerable to him even in her final months. Her love was real, and it was vast, and it was not enough, because what he needed was not more love. What he needed was a wall. The kindest thing you can do for someone who refuses to be accountable is to stop shielding them from consequences, because consequences are the only teacher they have left. I have a new apartment. I have the friends I chose, not the family I was assigned. I have work I am proud of, and a kitchen that smells like whatever I decided to cook, and mornings that are quiet, in the specific way that mornings are only quiet when you are not dreading anything. I have my mother's voicemail saved on my phone. I listen to it sometimes when I need to hear her voice, the precise, deliberate clarity of a woman making sure there was a record, the too much dill soup that she never admitted to. I don't need to forgive my brother to be free of him. I just need to know that the version of me who used to catch every glass before it hit the floor is finished with that job. She's retired. She's had enough. She's making toast at her own kitchen table, in her own quiet kitchen, and for the first time in her life, she isn't waiting for the next disaster to land. I am Claire, and I am finally, entirely, my own.